Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to another indie horror author interview with the wonderful Laurel Hightower.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. I was excited we can make something work. I've been following you for years at this point. I think I've read several things. I won your Mothman T-shirt giveaway when you
Yes, I
did your
remember. That was great.
yeah, and it was perfect because that year we went to Mothman. So we
Oh,
took the
awesome.
shirt and we read Below the way there, and it was very festive, very festive.
A nice
Yeah.
themed year.
Yeah. So Laurel has done a lot of stuff. Book titles, Crossroads, which is actually my introduction to you and who you were as an author. That was my very first book that I ever read by you. Below, which was the Mothman story. Every Woman Knows This, which started out as a short and then turned into a full book. Is that right? I haven't read that one yet.
It's a
So
collection.
it's a
So
collection.
yeah,
Okay.
so the short is just the title story
Mhm.
for it. But yeah, it's a bunch of short stories.
Oh, cool. I don't have that one yet. I'll have to get that. Silent Key, which I also have. And then this one was one that came up when I was just looking up, make sure I got everything right for the introductions. Whispers in the Dark, which was not one I was familiar with.
Yeah, that was my debut
Okay.
back in
Okay.
2018. So it's very different for the most part from what I write now.
Okay.
So yeah, that doesn't get a whole lot of play, but you
Yeah.
always love your firstborn. So
Of course. Yeah. I just saw the title and I didn't recognize. I was like, oh, I didn't know about this one. And then you've done a ton of anthology appearances. You've done it, been in a bunch of things. But today we're here to talk about your newest book, which is The Day of the Door. This came out, I think, this point a couple weeks ago, right?
I think it's 2 weeks ago today. Yeah, because it was a
Weeks ago
Tuesday. Yeah.
today.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're here to talk about that one. And I have to say, like I said, I've read two of your other books, and then some of your short stories that are in anthologies that I own, and I feel like this was just something, to me at least, it felt like just such a different experience from some of the other things that I've read from you. And so, we'll just kind of go through some generic stuff, obviously, before we dive in. We're not going to do any spoilers for anybody worried about that, because I definitely, and I'm sure Laurel agrees, we want you to go read the book. So we
Yeah.
won't do any spoilers. But yeah, just I wanted to kind of know what your writing process was, specifically because you write about a lot of very heavy things. And a lot of varied heavy things. And I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about what your process is like and how you decide to approach these topics, and just how that affects your writing process. Maybe if you were writing something, I don't know, do you even write anything a little less heavy? Everything you write just is in the feelings.
I I do have a few sort of comedic pieces.
Oh, yeah.
There's one called "Fuck This Shit Manor," and
Love that. Yeah.
"Give Me Your Fingers," and just like a few things that are just a little bit more comedic. They're not very heavy. So more of my
Okay.
short story stuff, is not.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't, but it's the same thing as like spicy food and how scary a movie is. I am not a good judge. Like I'll be like, "There's no spice to this at all," and my child will just be like flames coming out of his mouth, and I'm like, "Oh my god!" So yeah,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not allowed to be the judge of those things. I'm like, "It's not heavy at all," and then you read it, you're like, "Oh, I'm really sorry about that. Actually, that was kind of bad." Yeah, come to think of it. So, but I mean, as far as process, yeah, like I feel like I don't feel like writing it at the time as necessarily heavy, but I think in a lot of times it's because it's kind of cathartic. And that doesn't mean that these are all like, oh, these are all things that happened to me exactly. A lot of them are
Sure.
maybe just worries or they're spin-offs. Like Crossroads was definitely a worry.
Yes,
Um,
I get that. Yes.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so it was, that was a little bit hard to make a decision to write about because I was, I was scared to. I'm one of those like sort of super superstitious people. And I'm like, don't say its name. It'll look
Oh,
at
I
you.
know. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but then it was cathartic to kind of work that stuff out.
Yeah.
And then with this one, yeah, I I really liked the idea as it was coming together.
Yeah.
And I was excited to write about it. And then I think I finished it like right after Roe v. Wade got reversed because I remember
Oh,
It was like my birthday weekend, and I had said I went to a Renaissance fair with a girlfriend of mine, got hammered, and
yeah.
then went to a hotel for 2 nights and just, like,
Mhm.
wrote, just, like, endlessly, and it was such a good distraction for me. At
Yeah.
that point, I was just like, "Okay, here's a world I can control," So
Yeah, yes, yes.
so, yeah, I feel like the process was not, but in reading and talking about it more, yeah, it's heavy. But I feel like
Yeah,
it's one of those things too, like, where people who've dealt with a certain amount of trauma, like, we make jokes out of everything. So it's like, I feel like a lot of times on a first pass through,
yeah.
you know, I'm not connecting with that at that point yet.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm still very new to the writing stuff and or at least in this sense. And I haven't hit anything like this emotionally, so I can't even compare to what I like because I will tell you and I know I'm probably going to say this several times and I know I've already said this specifically to you. But this hit a lot of notes for me and I think to your point, I think whatever a reader takes away from it is going to impact I think the level of heavy that it reaches because for me this was very much I got out of my situation with my biological mother when I was very young, but this hit a lot of things for me. Like there were a lot of trauma response type things or things that these characters thought or the things that they said and I'm like, "Oh man, like it just really really hit for me." So this was like a heavy but compelling reading. Like I'm a very slow reader. I talk about this all the time. It takes me forever to get through stuff. And I genuinely could not stop reading this. Like I was and to your point, I think for me it was cathartic. I felt very seen and I felt very like the things that I were feeling were made valid and those kind of things. So it was definitely a heavy read in a really great complimentary kind of way.
Well, I mean, I'm glad. A lot of what I write has to do with wanting to feel seen and wanting other people to feel seen. And
Sure.
in some ways, there's like, I do a whole lot of like nonfiction reading and exploration of certain things, like how our minds work and things like that.
Yeah.
And I like to be able to, if possible, pass on some of like the wisdom or the points that I collect, on a grander scale. Because not everybody wants to read that stuff, and I don't want to just wander around constantly recommending self help books to people and slapping them in the face with them. So if
Yeah.
I can, sometimes it's a matter of like, can I put this in a format that
Yeah.
people maybe can find striking and they're more likely to engage with and then maybe take something
Mm.
away from it, because I know in my experiences, like, and it's so odd, like it'll be like the most random book or a really random scene in something, and I'll read it and then I'll just stop and be like, oh my God, this person gets it. Like they get it. They're in my head.
Yeah.
And there's something
Yeah.
so it's a little disturbing because you're like, wait, I thought those were all private thoughts. What are you doing here? But it's
Yeah.
also like, wow, okay, so I'm not the only one.
It feels good. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you just said about reading the nonfiction stuff actually plays a lot into something I'm gonna bring up later that I thought was just really well done, and now that you say that, it makes it that whole conversation makes perfect sense of where that came from, so that'll be cool to talk about now that you've said that. Yeah, so as far as, the day of the door, I keep wanting to say the door of the day. I don't know why. Ugh, words are hard. So inspiration for this concept or just kind of how you got to this idea. I know you said you made the comment that you liked how it was coming together. So I guess when you maybe got the concept, maybe it wasn't like a full idea yet, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, there was things were just sort of like nebulously floating around about some characters I wanted to explore.
Sure.
And some elements of things I wanted to include. I love ghost hunting shows. Um and I a lot of times you just have, I mean, you right, there's this like percolation, there's like in the back of your head there's some element you want to use and you're like, okay, well, I got to wait for the right
Yes.
story for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I know that I had like some elements of it, but then I was watching, it was a haunting recreation show.
Okay.
So instead of like ghost hunting, they're, getting the families together and talking about what they experienced at a certain time.
Didn't
And
know that was a thing. Okay.
yeah, it's good. Some of them are like, okay, stop. You're
Sure.
you're really like manipulating
Sure.
this family, like stop it.
Stop.
Um,
Yeah. Sure.
but there was one called Haunted, and then there was Haunted Latin America.
Okay.
And they were really good. But I noticed kind of a recurring theme in several episodes of both series was that you would, and it was unfortunately in what I saw always a mother. I'm sure that it's perfectly capable of being either parent.
Sure.
But the mother would sort of, she'd be the centerpiece and she'd be talking about how everything affected her and this awful thing she went through and how hard things
Okay.
were. And
Okay.
then sort of glancingly reference to, the treatment that she gave her children during that time. Like, well, this thing possessed me. And so I was really horrible to my children, isn't that sad for me? And I'm sitting there and I'm like watching that. And then I start watching the children. And in one particular one that I recall, there were two daughters. One was younger and she's like hanging on to her mother's words like a lifeline. Like, this is the only thing that could explain how you treated us. Yes, thank you. You're giving me back, the love of, in a childhood that I thought I had or that I wanted. And the oldest daughter is like, you can tell that the second the cameras are off, she's like gonna fucking cut her. She's like, I brought like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
razor, like you're going down, bitch. Like, and I just started thinking like,
Yeah.
the way she's describing all of these things are about how it affected her. It's not how those things affected her children. And, it's a case with, I wanted to be really careful with this
Okay.
because there are, it's very common with possession, whatever people want to believe about it.
Yeah.
There's a running theme that sometimes it has more to do with psychosis
Sure.
or, some form of mental illness.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
and,
What you're saying.
and
Yeah.
so you don't want to take advantage of that. But in making those comparisons,
Yeah.
because what I was looking at too was like, so in all of these instances, let's say you're possessed, let's say you're not. Let's say you have a mental illness, which is valid, and people who have mental illnesses need care. But they do not need to be scapegoated. They do, they don't need to be
Yeah.
attacked or anything like that.
Yeah.
However, if you have a parent who suffers from any of that,
Mhm.
what's their responsibility towards their children as far as keeping them safe and
Yeah.
as unharmed as possible? And I can't answer that and I don't want to, but I
Sure.
was sort of just kind of wanted to explore what that would look like, particularly if, because in looking at some of these mothers, I'm like, were there any entities or was this something you were going through? And
Yeah.
it's much easier for you to rewrite history at this point and say it was something else's fault. So
Yeah.
that was mostly what I wanted to explore. So I kind of like built this family around it and looked some at, how the different children would manifest their trauma. And yeah, so I started getting really excited about it after I watched that episode and started like kind of making
Yeah.
notes about like what, elements could be included. And yeah,
Yeah.
so it kind of came together from there. And I was kind of like, I was like, man, if I pull this off, this is going to be good. And if I don't, it's going to completely suck. So
Yeah, no, and I have to say, like, I think as far as like towing the line, I honestly like a lot of times, especially when I watch movies that are not quite similar in concept, because I think this is really unique as far as concept, but in the terms of there being like a female who has done bad things, right? Especially
mhm,
in this sense with the family dynamic, it's usually like it's so easy for writers and directors and stuff to just make them crazy, right? Like
yeah.
that's just their thing. Is like, no, they're just crazy. Like it was all a dream and they're just hallucinating or they're bipolar or they're all these things. And they try to use those things that then villainize the character. And
hmm
it puts this super negative spin on mental health instead of using, that platform in a positive way to kind of promote maybe a different angle from that. And so I never once thought, not my computer off the thing, that would have been bad. I never even thought about now there were some times where I questioned where this was going to go because there's elements of this where you honestly it's like going through the journey with the kids because you don't remember either as the reader because you weren't there, right? So as the reader you're like, yeah, I don't remember what happened either, like I need you to fill in the gaps. And so you're kind of going through this journey with them as these three siblings are kind of all in a very different place with their journey and where they are with it all. And it just felt like this very interesting balance of was she or wasn't she? And I never thought necessarily like, I just think that that balance was handled very well as far as like,
Good.
I never felt like it was just this easy. Well, she just had a mental disease and that's all. Like, so I do think that you handled that very well. And I
Good.
didn't read it that way. That's one of my least favorite tropes in horror is the woman that you can't believe the story because she's crazy. Like I hate those tropes. So no, I think you handled that really well in this.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And I mean, the further element to that too, and you know this, you're a mom, like
Yeah.
mothers in literature, in movies, in real life, we get scapegoated for everything. Everything is our fault. So if your child ends up with issues, that's clearly your fault.
Yep.
If you are not handling, because God, there's so many things that can affect us horribly simply based on our biology, or just the
Yeah.
way that women are treated.
Yeah.
Postpartum and things like that. And these are legitimate issues,
Yeah.
again, that women need assistance with, not scapegoating, not just, throwing it under the bush of, well, she's a terrible mother, it's her
Yeah.
fault for everything. So,
Yeah, and this I think covers those grounds as well of like when as the story goes on you find out the truth about all the things as they start to piece together. There's a very very like God, this conversation, I'm telling you, Laurel, like I think I read through this part of the story like twice. The conversation with Carrie and Nate at the end of the book
mhm.
is like Mike Flanagan dialogue, like end of the series. You know what I'm saying? Where it just like
Yeah.
at the end of like a midnight mass when they're sitting on the boat and they're having like this conversation
Yeah.
and they're like it's like that's what I felt about these. I must have reread this thing like 2 or 3 times because I loved the way that conversation was handled because, as somebody who had a mother that, and in my instance, the possession was drugs, so in my story that's to me, that was what that metaphor was to me as an individual reader. And I got told all the time by the family that like, there was, it wasn't she couldn't help it, it wasn't her fault, it wasn't, and then you have this beautiful conversation between Carrie and Nate at the very end of the book, that just covers so much and it breaks down so many things. And I just have to tell you, like, that's one of the like I'm just now in the last couple of years getting back into reading a lot in general because I took like a break and I just didn't read anything for years. And it's like one of the most interesting, compelling things I think I've read in a really long time because it just talks about all of those things that you just said, but puts them in a way that you can see all of these different perspectives at one time. And I thought it covers like all of that stuff just really, really, really well.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much. I'm so
Yeah,
happy that it landed that way.
it did. Yeah.
I didn't want to try to do like some Scooby Doo sum up at the end, so, but I felt like there were elements of it that needed to be addressed outside of the action.
Yeah. Yeah. And it didn't feel spoon fed. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just like, here's the end notes of everything that just in case you missed it. Like it didn't feel that way at all. It just felt like a very genuine conversation between two characters that we've gotten used to and understand their dynamic is a little complex. And they're just having this very realistic conversation after this event. And I loved, I think that's probably one of my favorite scenes in the book. I thought that was just like there's like 2 people I was messaging while I was reading this constantly, like it's like live tweeting, but live reading or whatever. And I was like, I think it was Tasha from Sinister Scoop, and then it might have been my partner. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like this scene, like, it's so good. But that's what it reminded me of. Was like how Mike Flanagan does that storytelling thing where he has sometimes it's a monologue and then sometimes it's a conversation between 2 people, but it's just such a really great way to convey information without feeling like you're, forcing it down somebody's throat.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Great.
And then I did want to, because I think maybe I looked up already, but I wanted to talk about the cover art and like where that
Yeah.
came from and what that journey was like, because the cover art is horrifying.
Isn't it?
It really is.
Like, it haunts me.
Me too.
But uh so that actually, it was, I guess, not exactly backwards, because this ended up being about 60,000 words. And the
Okay.
first draft of it was 40,000. So I'd
Okay.
already had that draft written, but like I knew, like I'd had some beta readers look at it, and I just knew, I was like, it's missing stuff. It needs to be punched up. Like, so this isn't ready. So I kind of tucked it away. And
Yeah.
then, Trevor Henderson posts his art all the time. And he posted this just as something he had drawn, something he'd done. And I commented and I was like, oh my God, I want to write this story. And he's like, oh my God, I wish you would. And then Max Booth was in my DMs like 5 seconds later, like, do you really want to? And then I was like, what if I already have? So we kind of just like went with the cover art first, because
That's
that was
cool.
also, I feel like, sort of what was missing is I had described the kind of critter, but not with this kind of detail, because part of my thing with monsters or ghosts or
Yeah.
whatever the
Yeah.
reveal is, a lot of times the reveal itself is disappointing. The majority
Yeah.
of the horror comes from the unseen. And
Yes.
so for me, I loved this because you look at it, you can study it as much as you want, and a huge percentage of it remains unseen. It's
Yes.
suggested, and that's Trevor's wonderful at that. He's got an amazing style that really does that, and that's what horrifies you more, is because 'cause you're like, "Oh, this is already
Where's the
horrible,
rest
but I
of
can
it?
tell there's more. What is it?" You know? Um, yeah, so I
Yeah.
feel like I feel like I'm just like some weird author who runs around, like, begging people to buy me covers, like, "Can I have this one?
I know.
Can I have this one?"
Yeah. No,
Max
that's
is eventually
cool.
gonna
I
just, like,
hear
block me, but
that cover, I don't know if you're like this. I've become in the last like couple years a cover hoarder. Like I have more covers than I have like because I just see it and I'm like one day, right? Like
Mhm.
I very rarely get one that I have something for. Very rarely. Like I usually am just like one day I'll figure it out.
I
Yeah.
use them for inspiration too, though. Like,
Sure.
some of it is just like, okay, I haven't written anything yet, but this feels like it's going to lead somewhere. And that's, I mean, there's huge merit to that. Plus, we need to support cover artists, damn it.
Oh yes, the real ones. Yeah. No, for
Yes, the
sure.
real ones, no AI.
No AI, yeah. And I feel like we were pretty lucky in the indie horror community because we do have such great ones that work with you that are willing and then they're on top of that. And I mean the prices and everything, but I mean there are so many that are affordable that make it really
Oh
easy
yeah.
for people who are like just starting out or can't do a whole lot. Like I mean, I haven't worked with a single cover artist that I don't just like love as a person. Like they're all really great.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. No, this is I'm gonna remove it's so good though. I'd seen it being shared, because I read the e version of this, and I'll get a physical when you have some that you're selling. But I read the digital, so it was like it's I don't know, like I'd seen it being shared, and then I opened it and I was just like, ugh, like it's very overwhelming. And I'm like, what? And for the record, I knew nothing about this book going in. I had no idea what I was in for. I had no idea what the cover had to do with anything. I had no idea. So it was very I was like, "Oh, I'm excited." Like
Our
you
readers
do.
are so we're just like, ew, it's disgusting, it's horrifying. I can't wait.
Can't wait to read it. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. And so because that was one of the things I want to talk about was getting published through Ghoulish and doing
Mhm.
this with them and kind of what that was like. So you kind of I think maybe started it when you were talking about you posted about the cover, and then is that where that conversation kind of started?
It is, yeah, and I mean, it helped that we'd worked together before,
Yes.
because Ghoulish put
Below,
out, yeah,
right?
Below. Yeah, Ghoulish put out Below,
Yeah, that's right.
and, um, yeah, so, I mean, we'd already worked together well. Like, Max is a wonderful editor. Max and
Yeah.
Lori are incredible to work with. They're very author forward,
Yes.
and just savvy, about how to market on a, somewhat limited budget, and, um
Yeah.
just getting eyes on it and everything. And that, of course, was also a Trevor Henderson cover. And so we just did it in the reverse order. I just like DM'd him and I was like, so awkward, but I have a book that maybe you want to publish. I don't know, but I have this time frame that I need it in because I've got an event. And so would you like to publish this in April if you like it? And he was like, well, that's very specific. It was, and I'm sorry, they. Uh,
Yeah.
so they, were like, okay, well, I'll take a look. And a big part of the reason I approached them too was because Max will absolutely not take something that they don't believe in. And I was
Yeah.
like, I don't want to put something out that's not good. Like I'm not a good gauge of my own work. So
Fair enough. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
felt like I could trust Max to be like, no, this isn't it. But they read it and they were into it. And then and I had told them that it was a Mothman one, and they came at me like very shortly thereafter with like, so here's this like Mothman picture that Trevor Henderson just like randomly put up. What do you think? And I'm just like, oh my God, I love it. So yeah,
Yeah.
like now we just choose our order, and like, did the cover come first or the book? Who knows? Could be either.
That's
But
cool though.
yeah, Ghoulish has been just across the board excellent to work with. And Max and Lori are so lovely in person too. I've been to Ghoulish every the book fest that they
Book
do
fest,
every year
yeah.
since it started, and they're just so wonderful to,
Yeah.
to be around. They're so kind and just good people.
Yeah, they certainly seem it. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting them in person, but they certainly seem it. And I just think with the publishing and the indie stuff and how it is, we need more of that, more of the people that you can trust, to work with. And it's a lot of faith you have to have in people to trust them with something like a book you wrote, because I feel like, for me at least, I don't think it will matter if I write 100 books. They're all going to be equally important, and I want whoever handles them to do it with care and love and respect. And I think that I have seen nothing but those things from everybody at Ghoulish. So
Yeah. Well, and one thing that, I mean, in a way, it feels egotistical to say, so we'll just set that aside. But I, I have a literary agent now, which is great, Becky Lejeune. She's wonderful.
yeah.
But when we were talking, about a contract and everything, I asked for a carve out to continue to work with Ghoulish,
Mhm.
because uh, I think that presses like Ghoulish deserve to be mid-list, or higher. Like, and for
Yeah.
me, I'm like, well, I want to support the presses that supported me, when I was
Yeah.
brand new, and also that I see doing good work. Like, because I mean, every time someone like joins one of the presses that I'm already with, I'm always like, welcome pub fam. And like, I legit mean that, because
Yeah.
like I want everyone involved to get eyes on their work, and if,
Yeah.
I'm if me working, and continuing to do that assists with that. Again, oh God, it sounds so egotistical. Anyway, I like to continue to work. Like, I like to still play in the indie field, because I am invested in seeing the presses that are ethical and doing good things. I want to see them
Yeah.
grow. I want to see them have an opportunity to give opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there's examples from even since I've been a part of the community, where people reach a certain level or they publish enough things, and then it's no, like all the people that did matter don't matter anymore. And I think it's nice to see when people start getting recognition and they start moving forward with their career and they start picking up traction, that they don't forget about kind of where they came from and what that's like to have to start from scratch or to have to try to really fight to get your stuff in. And it's so limited because God knows everybody has to, at least for the most of us still have to work a 9 to 5. Most of us are
Oh yeah.
still juggling, like I have a small child, like I have a full-time job, I have content creating. I have no time to do anything book related ever, and so it's a struggle to find the time to do those things, and then to find people, like I said, that you can trust to do
Yeah.
them. And then those people are also doing all of these other things and very stressed and pushed to their max and just want to help and do things that they love and care about. And it's just such a small number that it can be very difficult to get your stuff into those places. And so for people who have been around or who, like I said, picking up traction, it's good to still have that interaction, because that can still help people who are just starting out, just trying to get their first foot in the door, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I just like to see people having the opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. So as far as the story elements, there is a lot of memory play here, a lot of memories, a lot of puzzle pieces. Um, and I guess it was interesting because I am curious to know, was there a specific order to writing things like that? Because there's so many things that do eventually come full circle that connect, and I'm just wondering, like, did it connect because you did those pieces first, or kind of how you wrote things like that to make everything cohesive?
So I have a kind of a specific way I set things up.
Mm.
I'm definitely an outliner. I'm not a pantser. I'm a plotter. Um, and so I will, sort of like have an initial sort of note sheet where I'm spinning
Sure.
out the idea and seeing like, where's this going to go? What can I
Yeah.
do? All right, what's missing? What can I do to fix that?
Yeah.
And then I will do, character creations and build out who they are and what their reactions are going to be to things. And then
Yeah.
also I'll do like a baseline kind of scene plan of
Okay.
like,
Gotcha.
so that, and that helps me continue to hit the pacing well.
That makes
Um,
sense.
Yeah, because in previous manuscripts before I learned to start doing this, like I would like go back and do the scene plan after the fact to be like, dear God, nothing has happened in 50 pages, you know. So this allows me to like have a point to every chapter,
Sure.
like, okay, this is how it advances the plot.
Sure.
So I keep track of that stuff that way. And
Okay.
then this one I wrote in a pretty linear fashion.
Okay.
That's not always the case. Sometimes I'll end up with like scenes that are in my head that I then go back and link because they're the
Okay.
powerful ones that are,
Makes
kind
sense.
of to the forefront. But this one I wrote in a pretty linear fashion. And
Wow.
then a
Okay.
lot of it was so after Max and I had the contract for it, I was like, okay, well,
Mhm.
I want to do some edits first. I added about 20,000 words. And
Mhm.
some of that was, I mean, some of it was simply that to me, these things I love to give myself time to immerse myself with my characters,
Yeah.
to be them for a little while and just like throughout a day be like, well, how would Nate respond to this situation? Not Laurel. How would Nate do this? So
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
kind of feel them. And that helps me, like, when I know some of the traumatic things that happened, that helps me, like, it weaves in through the story as I go. Okay, well, what does Ari remember about this? What does Katie remember about this? And then on, the editing and pass throughs, I was able to see, like, is there a hole here? What happened
Sure.
here? And then
Right.
just kind of like weave it in there. But yeah, I was lucky enough with this one to just have all of that experience like in my head because I'd spent so much time with the characters because I just
Right.
really wanted to get them authentic. And I think it's common that siblings dealing with the same traumatic incidents are going to react to them differently and it's going to shape
Yes.
them in different ways. And I
Yep.
wanted to kind of like do justice to all of those.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Some end up in prison and some do YouTube. Yeah, no, totally, totally, totally realistic in that regard. We all deal with it different. I was
Agreed.
I can't remember if I actually wrote this in my review of it or not, but I said I know I said it today because Sophie Ingley just posted her
Yeah.
review of it today and she really, really loved it. I told her I'd give her a shout out because she said she really enjoyed it as well.
Sophie's
And I
wonderful.
told her I was like, Nate is who I am, but like Ari is who I wish I was. Like I wish that was like my like to just be like disconnect, just be
I know. It
like
would be so
sometimes I wish like
nice.
that was a thing, but it's not. I'm 100% Nate. Fly off the handle, ready to punch somebody. That's me. Like, and it's so like and then I have siblings that are the Katie. I'm telling you, like you hit the nail right on the head with these character types for sure, for sure.
That's
Um,
good.
Speaking of characters, so my favorite character, other than my doppelganger Nate, is Carrie. I loved
Yeah.
Carrie. So when we first, and again, no spoilers, but when we first met Carrie, I didn't know kind of how big of a role she was going to play. I thought maybe she was just sort of a side character or just something that would, I'm sure it had a purpose, obviously, because she's there, but I didn't know how big of a part of the story she was going to become. And I was just curious if she's based off anything in particular. Like, where did the inspiration for that specific character come from?
So she was actually a character that I had created for another story that I actually haven't written yet.
Oh, oh,
Um,
okay.
because at that point I was looking at the idea, where she talks about because honestly it just feels like and this was another like issue of like, okay, because I'm a big believer in ghosts and I believe in
Yeah,
hauntings.
same. Yeah,
And
me too.
but people are always like, oh, like there's like, well, that was a hallucination, it was this, it was that, whatever. And I with
Yeah,
her as a character, I wanted to explore, like, I mean, it feels to me like a natural outgrowth of like, hey, why don't we deal with all of it? Why don't we deal with the
I love that. Yeah,
counseling issues, that are creating these stunted emotions or repressed and that
yeah,
build up and have this
yeah,
thing? Because when you think about like poltergeists, you think about like, well, it's like a projection in some ways, it's a manifestation of
yeah,
like an adolescent who's dealing with a whole lot of hormones and a lot of
yeah,
emotions.
yeah,
And
for
so
sure.
I was like, okay, I feel like these things are a natural fit. So I
Yeah,
created her as a character to kind of like, she's got her theories and she's generally very calm, and but she's just very like, she's aloof but she's cares, but
yeah,
like a good therapist, she has to be like removed from it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, like I had created her for something else, and then I knew that I wanted
That's
Nate
funny.
to be a counselor.
Yeah,
Um, And then I was like, okay, you know what? I think Carrie maybe belongs here. Like she's tapping me on the shoulder, like, nope, I'm
That's
in.
cool.
Put me in, coach. So
Yeah.
I did, and I was really happy with how that worked, because I sort of had already created this whole theory for her, and I could see
Yeah.
it, outreaching into this family really needing that kind of intervention.
Yeah, no, it fits perfect. I would have never guessed in a million years that she was originally meant for something else. She fits so well in the story. I love her. Like her interactions with Stella are just like I just like she just is so whatever. I love it so much. Like, again, that's someone I wish I could be that way. I wish I could just when people are being the way that like Stella is, because she, she's over the top of stuff. And when she's like that, she's just like, eh. And I'm like, and then it's the best reactions because then it pisses Stella. Like then it just makes it even worse for the person who's trying to get the reaction, and you're just like, no.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
love that so much. No,
Yeah.
she's great. I loved her character so much. So
I love her too. I'm hoping to kind of revisit her some.
oh yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I'd love to see her do something else too. And then like okay, so I've read Crossroads and Below. This story, at least just this maybe just how I read it, but to me, this entire story from start to finish is primarily driven through conversations. Now, like in Below, where it's a lot of inner monologue, she spends a lot of time alone. So there's a lot of conversations inside the character's head. Whereas this is a lot of communication with other characters in the story. Did that happen naturally? Or how did you get to a place where that was the best angle to tell this story? Because it feels different from other things I've read that you've done.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if it was like a specific decision so much as how
Hmm.
the scenes kind of played out as I was writing, but
Yeah.
so much of it has to do, Stella makes it the Stella show,
Yes.
but it's not about her. And it never
Right.
has been. It's
Right.
always been about the siblings, about the survivors, the people who suffered through that and their relationships with each other. And
Right.
so, the conversations allowed me to illustrate again, like their various ways of how they sort of ingested and internalized all of these things, and how that because one of the other I think insidious things sometimes about narcissists is the way that they will pit their children against one another, and so that had to an extent worked over the years, like even though they
Yeah.
recognized it, they still had these issues with each other. And
Yeah.
I just kind of and it can be really hard for people to talk about and address those things.
Yeah, for sure.
And I just kind of wanted to, continue to illustrate that and have them experience things together as a unit now as much as possible instead of separately,
Mhm.
where they lose some of their power.
Yeah, that message is super strong, I would say, the togetherness of
Good.
it. I mean, there's very specific wording around that and things that are said, but it's a very clear picture of exactly what you just said, which I thought was brilliant. I loved the idea of them needing to kind of come back together to be able to deal with any of it because they're obviously not really none of them are really dealing with it. They're
Mhm.
processing it in their own way, but they're not really dealing with any of it. They're just trying to move on or they're staying in the same moment over and over again, or the different things that they all experience in their adult life. And it was a really cool concept. It's like one of my favorite things when I'm reading or watching anything, and I don't mind romance or love interest type things. I'm totally good to read that, watch that stuff too. But I love either friendships or sibling dynamics. And when those are the focal point of stories, because I think those tend to be, I guess, more engaging to me. I don't know. There's just something about those dynamics that just draw me in more, have me more invested. And then that, of course, makes everything amplified as I'm experiencing the story through their eyes, or through their conversations in this case. And I thought the conversations piece specifically was just really great storytelling because it was the best way I think to just get these things out. I mean, there's a few things obviously where the thoughts are inside or it's action based things or things are happening, but there's so many conversations that it is almost like a therapy session, and it felt very we've used this word multiple times I think at this point, but it's very cathartic to hear these people saying to these other people things that I've thought or that I've wanted to say or that I had never thought maybe from my other siblings perspective, that kind of thing. And so I loved the conversational aspects of the way that the story was told.
I'm so glad. That's awesome to hear. I'm really glad
Yeah.
that worked out.
The okay, the reunion. I won't say a lot of specifics. Oof.
Yeah.
That that first reunion of the siblings and the mom after all this was almost painful to read. Like I felt so tense, like I was a part of it. I don't know. It was just one of those things where I was just sitting like, oh my God. Because I'm imagining like what that would be like after all this time. And then like again, you've got the three different, very different takes on the situation and just their feelings. I mean, when you were writing this, did you feel like that or was it kind of, I don't know. It feels like it would be a lot to write. Like you'd feel like angry or angry typing, I guess. I don't know. That's writing, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, although some of it was a little bit fun for me because,
Yeah.
it was I think people who haven't dealt with narcissists,
Mhm.
um, like, at all, which I think is rare. Even people who have not dealt with it in a home perspective have
Sure.
observed it, but if someone has never seen that, I know that it could probably seem really over the top, like, who would actually talk this way? Who would do that? But, you know, they do,
They
and it's
exist.
kind of
No,
fun
they're
to be
real.
like it's like no matter how over the top I make this, it's still gonna be accurate. And so that was a little bit fun because she was just like because
Mhm.
I also wanted Nate to be mad,
Yeah,
because that's
rightfully so.
yeah, that's a big message of it, and particularly like and not just children who've experienced trauma. This is common across the board, and this is something I read that was interesting and hadn't
Mhm.
occurred to me, and I'm glad I did read because I have my own son now.
Yeah.
Um, and it's always been important for me to make sure he feels safe in expressing his emotions, and
Yes.
not let my own dial up in response, just and that really for his personality type especially works really well.
Yeah.
But it was the idea that like even very well-meaning parents, like if their child's having a meltdown, the first instinct, and it doesn't even have to be based in like, oh, we're in public, we got to be quiet. It's
Yeah.
just like, oh my goodness, you're crying, you're upset. Let's fix that. Let's stop it. And it comes from a good place, comes from a place
It
of
does.
love.
Yeah.
But it sends the message that you're only lovable when you're chill,
Yeah.
or when you're happy or when
And
you're
you're not being
easygoing.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nate has
Yeah.
so much guilt over his anger. He
Yes.
struggles because he's so mad at himself every time he gets angry, and it's just this like self-perpetuating thing.
Yes.
And as a species spend an insane amount of time fighting emotions and feelings and chastising ourselves for them instead of just being like, I am angry. Perhaps
Yeah.
it makes sense, perhaps it does not. I'm not going to hurt anyone, but I am angry. I'm going to walk away now and deal with that. And it's
Yeah.
like I feel like it would be over a lot faster. I am so guilty of this, like so guilty of
Yeah.
it.
No, same.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, it was a little bit fun to write that. And maybe it's because, I kind of knew down the line. It's just
Yeah.
like
Sure.
build this up and then,
And it read so realistic too. I mean, just from my own personal background, like they really do like they really do talk like that. Like it is really one of those things where you're just like, it's so maddening. And you can go into it exactly like Nate did, where it's like, I'm fine. I'm just gonna be fine. I'm gonna figure it out. Like I can keep it under control. And then it's like 5 seconds into it, and he's like, that's it. I can't do it anymore. I've had enough. I got to get this rage out. And it's so relatable. And even not even in a family sense. I have felt that way with coworkers. I have felt that way in traffic. Like, where like,
oh
I'm
yeah.
just not going to let this bother me. And then you rolling windows down and you're yelling out, 4-letter words at cars as they go by. It's like, and I come from, I was raised by the generation that told me that I just needed to get over it. Like
Yeah.
my very first heartbreak, my mom told me, she was like, that's enough. I don't want to hear it anymore. And I'm like, when you're 14, that shit is everything, man. You can't tell. So I spent most of my adult life having to learn to accept my feelings and communicate them in an effective way again from being shut down. So I'm the same way with my son. Sometimes we just sit together and he just cries. I'm like, whatever we have to do. Do you want me to hug you? Do you want me to just sit here, keep you company? Whatever you want, but let's just talk about it. Let's get it out. You just do whatever feels right. That if that's being quiet, that's cool. If it's crying, that's cool. As long as we're not hitting or breaking nothing, I don't care. Like
Yeah. And
whatever
then
it
and
takes
they
to get
get
it out.
through it. When they're
Yes.
allowed to express it, they get through it and then they feel safe. And
Yes.
then they learn as they grow healthier ways to regulate their emotions. But,
Mhm.
you know, we expect children. to have emotional control that most adults do not have. Um,
Yes.
and just even things like, and again, I'm very, very lucky with him. Some of it is just who he is. But
Yeah.
he has had like exactly one meltdown over wanting something that he didn't get.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that has been, I don't say like, well, you already have all this, you should be grateful for what you have. Like, cause I look around and I'm like, dude, I want to buy every dress on midnight hour, like immediately. I just want to put it all in my cart and I want to just say, boop, buy.
I get it. Same. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm
it's
like
like,
that about stuff too. Yeah.
if he's looking around like, but I want this and now I'm sad that I don't have it, I want to be like, right. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could just like get a basket, throw it all in and just buy it? I'm bummed too. And that really helps. He's like, yeah, okay. And it's just like, again, we spend a lot of time telling children not to feel things or that it is bad to feel them, like, oh, you're ungrateful because you got this thing already and somehow you went this other thing. They're children and it doesn't cancel that out. Like they can
Yeah.
be happy for the thing that they've gotten and
Yeah.
still have tunnel vision on the next thing. Like, that doesn't make them bad. It's just they're
Yeah.
little, they're learning.
Yeah. You know what? I think that's really good advice for me randomly because I I have not known how to handle those situations or what to say because I'm so worried I'm going to say the wrong thing
Yeah.
because so I do not have just the one time. It's been way more than one. But like short story, we went to Party City to get Lay's for Luau Day and it's next to a bunch of very bright fun things. We started on plastic yard flamingos and it was a hard no for me. I was like, we do not need yard flamingos. I appreciate your creativity and your whimsy, but we do not need those. Like let's find something else. I was like, how about a shark cup? Right? It's summer. You like cups. You love sharks, maybe. Well, then he found a golden pineapple cup, and it's like this fucking big, and it's gold, like disco ball gold, and it's like $9 for a I'm like, what about this $3 like palm tree one? Anyway, it ended in a very big argument. And I finally told him that we would just get both, but that we need to like stand up and maybe handle it a little bit differently. But I got told no about everything when I was a child. And so my instinct is to just let him get whatever the fuck he wants. But sometimes
Same.
that's not feasible. So I'm so glad that you said that because I've never known what even the right approach was because I don't really believe in this concept of spoiled and like, that kind of like
No.
I don't really believe in that. And so I'm glad this turned into like parenting therapy with Laurel. I love it. No, I just
I accidentally do that from time to
no,
time.
it's great. I'm it's great. I've seen a couple of things that you've posted in regards to your little and I think that for the I mean at least from what I've seen, I think we're pretty much on the same brainwave of what we are trying to accomplish by raising a better generation. And so no, that was good to hear. Now I know like what better things to say than you have so much stuff already. It's definitely at
Well,
the
and I
point.
mean, yes, because it's like our house is like literally overflowing with it.
Yes. Yes.
But I mean, I
Yeah.
remember being that age and there's this feeling of loss, like there's this like I feel this
That's
connection to this
true.
thing. And now I'm being told like, and as adults, we can say like, I can't afford it this week, but I'll come back maybe next month or whatever. Like you
Sure.
have this knowledge and this temporal understanding of things that kids do
Sure.
not have. So it feels
That's
like
a
loss.
great
So I
point.
mean,
That's
there
a
are
great
times
point.
that like he, gets upset because we can't have it. And I will just let him cry. I'm like, I know. And
Yeah.
I don't bring him to places that children don't belong. I'm not going to bring him to a bar or like a fancy
Oh,
restaurant or
sure.
anything.
Yeah. No, no, no.
But I
Yeah.
don't have any patience with people who are shitty when a child gets upset in public. Like, am I putting him in your ear to scream? Well, then I suck. But if I'm gently holding his
Yeah.
hand, letting him cry, leading him out, like, don't give me a dirty look. I'll knock you down the escalator.
Yeah.
Hang on, mommy needs to express some anger. Be right back.
I used to feel like I think before I had kids, I was or before I had kids, I was like super judgy because I had no concept, no point of reference. And I remember distinctively, speaking of dirty looks, one thing I thought was outrageous was those backpack leashes. Okay.
Yeah.
I when my son was 2 years old, he was chaos incarnate, which is fine. I've welcomed it. I love it so much. It's one of my favorite things about his personality. He just wants to have a great time. He's just there for the moment. And anyway, we took him to the aquarium, and I was like, there is no way in hell, as busy as it is in the Atlanta aquarium, the Georgia aquarium, the big one. I'm like, there's no way in hell. And so I'm like, people are just gonna be mad as we put on his little dinosaur thing, and it went to my wrist, and it was never, I mean, I'm not like, but it was enough that I knew where he was, where he could kind of explore on his own terms, but there's limitations for safety reasons. And
Yeah.
some people looked at me like, damn, that's a good idea. And some people were like, oh my God. I'm like, you know what though? He wasn't on the 6 o'clock news. So
Exactly. He didn't jump in the penguin
oh no, for
enclosure or
sure.
anything like
End
that.
up going swimming with the sharks. Give me a break.
Oh
Yeah.
God. Oh yeah. See. Ugh.
Sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna segue back in. Not really. I don't have a connection to what I was going to talk about next. But so a lot of themes in this, ton of themes. The ones that spoke out to me the most based on my own personal experience were things of like grief and trauma and forgiveness. What are some things you hope people get out of reading this story, just given what you've put into it, what you've read about, the things that you've put into it all together?
I mean, I want to entertain,
Yeah,
like
sure.
because we, being able to escape, being able to read things that interest us and are enjoyable, are necessary.
Sure.
We all need that, whatever format it takes doesn't have to be reading. So I want to entertain. And just as an aside, if anyone has any problems with DNFing, you have my express permission to DNF anything you're not enjoying. That's mine. Like, I don't want you to suffer through it. Reading's supposed to be fun. If you
Yeah.
hate it, throw it across the room, cough on it. I don't care. Whatever you do, get rid of it. If it's
Yeah,
not entertaining, if it's not serving your purposes, move on.
for sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's I also, again, like we talked about, I wanted people to feel seen by this.
Yeah.
Because, in a lot of the reading that I've done, people are like, because I'll be reading like patient cases and they're taken completely by surprise that stuff is actually still manifesting for them. A lot of people have this feeling that by acknowledging and realizing that they dealt with some trauma, that that's all they need to do. And there's a whole lot of work that goes into it. And there's a whole lot of strange ways that it manifests in your physical body, and other ways. So I kind of wanted to maybe open a little door for folks to say, like, this is me. Okay, this is me on the page. This is my family.
Yeah.
But they're not being presented as a bad person. This isn't a bad person. This is a normal character in need of assistance. And so I want people to feel seen. And then lastly, like, honestly, it is, including Carrie in there, and particularly that last
Yeah.
conversation was my way of sneaking therapy into the world. Like,
Yeah.
I love therapy. I'm
It's
like,
great.
and
No,
and
it's great.
occasionally, like, someone else, like, I'll be talking and someone will say, "You've had a lot of therapy, huh?" I'm like, "Yes." Is it just the way I talk? That's fine. I'll just assume it means that I'm really healthy. But but I mean, not everybody can,
Yeah.
just from a cost standpoint,
It's
and
expensive. Yes.
it is daunting and exhausting to find a therapist when you're in the midst of something. I know this,
Hmm.
and so, like, I'm lucky to have somebody that it just really gets me and holds me
Yeah.
accountable and is fantastic, but I just recognize how hard that is. So I
Yeah.
just kind of want to, and also just the books that I read, there are books that I've read that just like completely blew my mind, made a huge
Mhm.
difference for me.
Yeah.
But I am definitely guilty of this. Like, if someone comes to me and is like, "This is the book you need, it's going to change your life," I'm like, literally never going to read it. Just there's something about that I'm just like, "Oh no, change my life. Screw that." Um, and
Fair.
I didn't even know I did that. But then I was like, "Oh, look at this list of books people recommend," and I just completely, ditched. So apologies to anyone who probably made a really good recommendation, and I was just like, recalcitrant about. But I know that not everybody wants to read nonfiction.
Yeah.
That there's a little bit of a knee jerk, like, ugh, you say it's going to change my life. This is hippy dippy. I don't want it. And so
Yeah.
if I can just, like, a lot of times what I'll do with my friends
Hmm.
who I'm like, okay, I think this will help you. I know you're never going to read this, so here's some bullet points.
Oh,
you
sure.
know,
That's a good idea. Yeah.
yeah, because I want to
Yeah.
make things accessible for folks, and I don't know, just offer some hope.
Yeah.
You know, and just things that, because man, like, the inner child thing seems so, that is real hippy dippy. It really sounds like it. You're like, okay, inner child. But
Sure.
there are things that we needed to hear, and we maybe didn't hear them when we needed them, but
Yeah.
it still helps to hear them now. And
Yeah.
so, if someone can read something and hear what Carrie has to say and decide that that applies to them,
Yeah.
that's what I hope. So there's a very long answer, but yeah, apparently I have great missions for this book. I want to entertain everyone, I want to make them feel seen, and I'm going to therapize the entire nation. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, on top of all of that, you know, if you're in like what you think is a good place, therapy will show you that you're not. You know what I mean? Like when I started going to therapy post divorce, I was like, it's really not that bad, right? You know, like, and then we started talking and I'm like, I hate this. Like, why am I paying for you to be mean to me, basically, you know? And but it played into learning about like why I parent the way that I do, or why being a mom is so important to me, and just shit that you don't think about until you have another person like,
Oh yeah.
why do you think that is? And you're like, I gotta go. I don't want to talk about it.
I'm offended by this connection that you just made because it's true.
Like, how dare
And
you
that's
be
rude.
accurate? I can't do this anymore. I'm ending this relationship.
Your
But
truth hurt my feelings, and I'm not
yeah,
good with that.
it's a lot. So it's so much. And most of the time you're only in there for like an hour. Do you it's just like, you opened up all this and now I have to go back out there. Are you fucking kidding me?
My eye makeup is down at my chin. You can't do
Oh,
this to me. Give me a chance to recover.
I gotta at least take a nap and rehydrate first. I can't, yeah. It's wild. So I'm not gonna we can't talk about this, but I just have to tell you that when I read the line, all 10 of them, I about lost my shit. Because at first I like it was one of those like dumb moments where I'm like, what? Oh my God. It's just one simple sentence. It's 4 words, but I was like, this shit right here is
I'm glad it wasn't too subtle.
no, it did take me a minute, but that's just me. That's just the way my brain works. I was like, what? I went back and I read like the previous couple, and I was like, oh, I understand now. And it was just, but it was like I have a lot of downtime at work currently because our business is very slow right now. It's starting to pick up, but I had a lot of time to read while I was at work. So that's what I was doing. And so I was literally like at my desk going, trying to keep it quiet while I'm reading. So I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Anyway, I loved that line. It was like a punch.
Yay.
You know, I loved it so much.
I'm so glad.
So we can't really talk about that, but I wanted to say that because I was just like, what the yeah, I was just like, yeah, that hit really hard. And so you've kind of answered this already. You said that you do believe in ghost. Just kind of wrap up point because I'm just genuinely curious. Have you had any ghost experiences of your own?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot, like, it's not very
Yeah.
common. It has a lot to do with, like, location for me.
Sure.
I'm Southern, so I've definitely, gotten a chance to bid goodbye to some family shortly after they pass, like, I've seen and spoken to and that kind of thing, and,
Oh, okay.
um, those are usually only occur, like, shortly after a death, and then I feel like, they kinda
Yeah.
move on from there.
Yeah.
But there've been some locations that were really unpleasant.
Okay.
And, again, I sort of subscribe some to Carrie's theory of like some of it is like an actual, might have some sentience. But a lot of what we deal with sometimes are just like almost like a vortex of like anger or,
Yeah.
just uh, rage and like hatred and a lot of things that aren't really resolved. Um,
Yeah.
there was just an apartment that my mother was looking at in Tennessee, and I wasn't gonna live there. I'd already moved out, but she wanted me to come check it out, and I was just like, "I gotta go, like,
Oh
this is
no.
horrible." Like,
Dang.
there was almost this, like, black vortex, like, underneath one of the counters, um, in the kitchen, and I was like, where is this coming? What is this? Why is this here? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And,
Crazy.
that was actually where she was gonna put the dogs' food bowls. And
Oh, okay.
she another time brought the dogs in to check it out, and she said they looked
We're
at
like,
that spot and they took off running. I was
yep,
like,
they
"Okay, well,
know.
that's legit." So yeah, there's just been
Mm-mm.
like a few it's a lot of it's location based. And then interestingly, I've had some experiences in my home now that I've lived in for like 17 years, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I don't it's not haunted. There's not anything bad energy here, but
Yeah.
there's water that flows under the property. And I feel like
Gotcha.
those things attach to an extent. So there were a
Yeah.
few times where I feel like something was passing through based on that. And I was like, that's not cool. Please fuck off. Like,
Yeah.
this
The
is my home.
water
I'm trying to sleep.
yeah, the water thing is a big is there's a lot to unpack with water as far as water being like a I don't know what you'd call it. Not a
Maybe a
I don't know.
conduit
Yeah,
or
kind of like,
yeah.
or just like a magnet almost, and it carries
Yeah.
like exactly like you said, it can carry things through, and there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, I've had a few myself. I tried very hard to turn myself off to it because I don't want to. If I don't want, I'm good not knowing. I'll just live in my little human world. But kind of touch on this story in particular, just because I feel like it's relevant. So we're talking about things that manifest from emotions as opposed to an actual entity or something to that effect. When I first moved up here to Atlanta from my hometown, I lived with my best friend and her husband. And at the time, we worked together, went to school together, lived together, hung out together. And we were going through a very, very rough patch in our friendship where there was just a lot of tension. Nothing was getting resolved. It was this huge clusterfuck of really negative emotions constantly. And then, of course, naturally, the husband gets drug into it, right? Because he has to live there with us. And so, but there was one night, I was sitting in my bed and my bed was long like this. And then the stairs that went downstairs, the rail was like right here. And I had done a Snapchat and I lowered the phone and I was like, no filter, just a regular Snapchat. And I lowered the phone and there was a white like face over the stair rail.
Oh
Scared the
God.
shit out of me.
No
I'm
kidding.
and at the same time, I'm not exaggerating. My dog was laying next to me. I lowered my phone to look at it, and my dog like stood up and was reacting
Oh
to
God.
whatever was there. Okay. So fast forward, my best friend and I don't talk for like a couple weeks around that time. And so we're finally starting to patch things up and things are starting to whatever. And she tells me about this night that she woke up in the middle of the night and she said it didn't feel like sleep paralysis because she could move. She didn't feel, restricted that way. But she said she just felt weird. And then when she looked up, and I had not told her this is not made up, she described seeing in her room the exact same thing that I saw over the stair rail.
Oof.
And I was like, that is fucking insane. I was like, well, I've got a story for you. And it's like, and for a little while we would hear noises around the house and stuff, nothing crazy. Those were the only two major events. But once we resolved our issues and we talked about things, and we went back to being, normal, like happy and interacting. And we just, we never saw or experienced anything else after that. And that was like the first time in my life where I ever thought, okay, there's something to that. Like that's got to be related to what we were dealing with, because like what else? It just seemed weird that like no, first of all, her husband had never seen anything and they'd never seen anything before I moved in. We never saw anything after that. And we were there for a good year or so after that. But I genuinely think it was related to whatever we were feeling at the time. There was just too much going on and we were the only two people to experience it. So it was very strange.
That is strange. That's so interesting though. The corroboration,
It
without
it
the
scared the shit out of me when she said it. I was like, "No," because there's a part of you, like, I think this is a natural response. Even if you're a believer, I think when you see or experience things, there's a part of you that wonders if you just didn't
Mhm.
actually see anything, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
by the time I reacted, I had hit send on the Snapchat, and that was before you knew that they were actually logging your Snapchats when you thought they weren't. And so I was like, and I wasn't able to like look at it again.
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Oh, maybe it just seemed like that." Like you start making excuses. But when
Mhm.
she told me she described the exact same thing down to the facial marks that were present, I was
Oh,
like,
that's eerie.
"Mm-mm, don't like that." And she's like, "I think I was just having
Okay.
a bad dream." And I was like, "No, I don't think so."
We can tell ourselves that so we can sleep, but,
I know, because we don't want to deal with the reality of how creepy that is. Yeah. So
Yeah. Oof.
yeah. Well, this has been fun. I've really had like I said before we started recording, I didn't realize how much stuff I wrote down to talk about because I was just really into the story. And so I was like, I got a lot to talk about apparently, and it'd be even worse honestly if it was spoilers. So it's probably for the best time was that it was spoiler free. But I just I really enjoyed the Day of the Door. I'm gonna put links to where you can find Laurel and get your own copy in the description for this episode. But I mean, yeah, go buy it, read it. It's so good. If you're looking for, affordable therapy, just read Laurel Hightower. That'll get you through some things, I think.
It'll get you started.
It'll get you started. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks again, Laurel, for making time to come on and talk about your book. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to whatever you do next, especially I would love to see Carrie again. Love to see Carrie again. She's great.
I hope I get to do that. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me on, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate your kind words about it.
Yeah, of
That's awesome.
course.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad you liked it.
Yeah, no, of course. And I guess thanks everybody for hanging out and talking the day of the door. Like I said, we didn't do any spoilers, so nothing's ruined. There's a lot to unpack with this story. Highly recommend checking out the links to go get your own copy. And that's all we have for this episode. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Hope you have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.